Hello, everyone. This is David Ross back with another, I don't know what we're going to call them, another episode of 5 Minutes of Word and Spirit, which is where I take just a couple of minutes to further the purpose of my blog, which is to combine academic theology with charismatic Pentecostal understandings of the work of the Spirit through the church and these kinds of things, kind of bringing Word and Spirit together and head and heart together. Whenever I've done these things, these little 5-minute videos, they've almost always ended up being over 5 minutes, which is silly because the name of this series is 5 Minutes of Words and Spirit. So I'm going to be precise this time about getting it 5 minutes or less. Well, I thought that I'd discuss just very briefly a particular verse that gets put to a lot of uses in the charismatic movement. As soon as I read it, you'll be familiar with it. It's Matthew 18, starting verse 18. And Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And then verse 19, another famous verse, "Again, truly I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven." Verse 20, "For where two or three are gathered in my name, I am there among them." So how many times have you heard perhaps a worship leader open a worship set with praying a prayer or reading this verse, maybe saying, there's two or three or more of us here, therefore God is in the midst of us, or referring to this text? Or maybe how many of you have heard maybe a prophetic individual or a pastor or leader or layperson leading from the stage talking about, oftentimes in charismatic circles, we get this idea of binding and loosing, drawing on this verse where sometimes it's used in reference to angels, asking God to loose angels to do things, or sometimes it's related to sort of declaratory prayers for healing or breakthrough or these kinds of things. But what all of these uses of this text neglect is the C word, the three C's for biblical interpretation, which are context, context, and context. So if we look at both of these verses, those uses which they're sometimes put to are completely divorced from the larger unit of text, which is about discipline in the ecclesia, in the church. And so the "where two or three are gathered" reference, Jesus is not saying if there's more than one person here, I'm more present in sort of a spiritual kind of way than I usually am. What he's saying is where the church decides to discipline someone based on the testimony of two or three witnesses. It's referring back to the law of Moses, where two or three witnesses are required to bring a charge against a member of the community. So it's talking about church discipline. Jesus is saying if the community decides that someone's committed a disqualifying sin, then Jesus himself will back up the decision, the communal decision of the church and its leaders as they decide to exercise discipline. So it's got nothing to do with sort of just a general gathering, prayer gathering of two or three people or whatever. It's specifically related to church discipline. And the same relates to the binding and loosing. It's got absolutely nothing to do with releasing angels or sort of kind of our imagination as charismatics sometimes just runs a little bit wild, where we're sort of loosing angels or healing or whatever it may be. And as much as I believe in praying for healing, this verse has nothing to do with that. The idea of what's being bound on heaven is bound on earth, loosed, has to do with the authority of heaven, i.e. God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, again, backing up the disciplinary decisions that are communally discerned by the ecclesia with the help of the guidance of the Spirit and two or three witnesses. So this is just a good lesson. In charismatic circles, we often sort of our implementation of certain church practices is sometimes not tightly tied to the text being read in context. I have a friend who I haven't seen for a while, but George Draconis, he's a friend of mine, and he one time in a church setting gave the image of a kite where you hold the kite and the kite kind of catches the wind of the Spirit, and that's kind of moving in the power of the Spirit, prophesying, praying for healing, these kinds of things, giving words of knowledge. But the kite needs to be tied, held by the person. It needs to be tethered to, which George said the kite was the Spirit moving in the wind. But that needs to be tied to proper biblical interpretation in context with proper hermeneutical principles. Otherwise, the kite just flies away and goes all kinds of places that God never really intended it for it to go. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. Feel free to let me know what you think.